It was the little things, the things I'd never noticed before, that started to make me wonder. But by the time I realized, it was already too late. The slow unraveling of my marriage wasn't an obvious, dramatic explosion. It wasn't a fight or an affair. No, it was far more sinister. It was a quiet, creeping sense of something missing, something that once was there, but had somehow disappeared without me noticing. There's a strange feeling that comes over you when you realize that the person you've shared everything with, the person who once felt like your everything, has begun to slowly slip through your fingers. It's not a dramatic moment. It's just a whisper, a quiet shift that no one talks about. We had been living together for almost 7 years, and in that time, I'd grown comfortable in the routine. It was easy. We worked, we ate dinner together, we watched TV, we shared our bed. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. That's what I told myself. But now, when I looked back at it all, it felt more like we were two strangers who had learned how to coexist than a married couple who loved each other. The first sign was small. She began to come home later and later from work. At first, I thought she was just busy, maybe with something at the office. But it wasn't just that. She started leaving the house earlier too, and when I asked her where she was going, the answers were vague. Just out with a friend, or needed to clear my head. At first, I told myself it wasn't anything to worry about. People need their space, right? It was probably just a phase. But deep down, I knew something was off. The spark I had once seen in her eyes, the same spark that made her look at me like I was the only person in the room, was gone. Her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. Her laughter, once infectious, had become distant, detached. One night, I came home from work earlier than usual, just after 7 p.m. I had hoped to surprise her, maybe take her out for a nice dinner, or just enjoy an evening together. I didn't expect anything extraordinary, but I did expect some acknowledgement. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I checked the kitchen and living room, but couldn't find her. Her coat was gone, and there was no sign of her. I looked at my watch and felt a pang of frustration. Where could she be? She hadn't mentioned going anywhere. Was she out again? I didn't know why, but a sick feeling crept over me as I sat on the couch, waiting for her to come home. Time passed, and it was nearly 9 p.m. by the time she walked through the door. Her face was expressionless, like she hadn't been out at all. But her eyes, they were different. Empty. Almost like they were staring right through me. Where were you? I asked, trying to keep the calm tone in my voice. It was a simple question, but I felt a tightness in my chest. She glanced at me, her gaze cool and detached, and muttered, "Just out. With a friend." That was all she said. But something in her tone didn't sit right with me. There was no enthusiasm, no detail, nothing to suggest that she had actually been out with anyone. And that's when I started to wonder if there was something more behind it. We sat down in the living room, but the conversation never flowed like it used to. I tried to engage her in small talk, asking about her day, but she gave short, clipped responses. It felt like we were strangers again. There was no warmth, no connection. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about one evening. This had been building for weeks. The distance between us had been growing, and I had been too blind to see it. I thought about saying something, anything, to bridge the gap between us, but every time I opened my mouth, I felt like I was speaking to a wall. It was as if she wasn't even really there, emotionally. Sure, her body was present, but her mind, her heart, they were elsewhere. "Emily, can we talk?" I finally said, my voice tinged with the anxiety I had been holding in. "Something's not right. You've been different lately, and I don't know how to fix it if we don't talk about it." She stared at the TV screen in front of her, not responding. She didn't even turn to look at me. I could see her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold, distant, and empty. "I just don't feel like it anymore." The words were simple, but they hit me like a ton of bricks. "Feel like what?" I asked, my heart racing. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence grow again, as if she was giving me time to understand what she was saying. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. "I don't feel like trying anymore," she said finally, without emotion. "I don't feel like being with you. I don't feel like this is working." I froze, not sure how to react. "You don't feel like being with me?" I echoed, barely able to believe what I was hearing. She nodded slowly. "It's not about you, okay? It's just, I don't feel anything anymore. I don't feel the way I used to feel. About you. About us." Her words landed on me like a heavy weight, and I sat there in stunned silence. What was happening? Was she really saying that? Did she really mean it? And then she stood up, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was preparing for something. I'm tired, Peter. I just need some space. She left the room, walking away without another word. I sat there, staring at the empty space where she had just been. My mind was racing, but the only thing I could hear was the faint sound of her footsteps as she walked down the hall. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, cold, distant, not the woman I married. What had happened? What had changed? And more than anything, I wondered if I had somehow missed the signs. Had I really been that blind to what was going on? Or had she already made up her mind, and I was just the last to know? The questions lingered in my mind, unanswered, as the night stretched on. And as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept repeating in my head. How had we gotten here? The following days were a blur. Every morning, I woke up with a sinking feeling in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to confront Emily again. Her words kept echoing in my head. I don't feel anything anymore, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already shifted permanently. There was an emptiness in the house now, a tension that seemed to hang in the air, suffocating everything. We'd spent the better part of a week avoiding each other, both retreating into our own spaces. I'd work late into the night, trying to distract myself from the unsettling thoughts that swirled around in my mind. But every time I walked into the living room, or every time I sat down to eat dinner, I was reminded of the distance between us. I tried to make small gestures, offering to cook dinner or asking if she wanted to go out for a walk, but she always gave me that same vacant response, a simple, "I'm fine," followed by a dismissive shrug. It was clear she wasn't interested, but I couldn't understand why. What had changed? Where had the woman I married gone? It wasn't until I caught a glimpse of something I wasn't meant to see that everything began to unravel. I had gotten home early one evening, hoping to catch Emily off guard, to maybe talk things out, figure out if there was still a way to fix this. But when I stepped into the house, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking softly, too softly for me to catch every word, but there was something about her voice that made my heart race. There was a warmth to it that I hadn't heard in weeks. It was intimate. It wasn't the tone she used with me. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I stood still, trying to remain invisible, as though if I didn't move, she wouldn't notice me. My mind started to race. Who was she talking to? Why did she sound so different when she spoke to them? I could barely make out what she said, but I heard enough to piece it together. I know. I miss you too. It's just hard to keep up the act. But soon, we'll figure it all out, I promise. My breath caught in my throat. My stomach dropped, and a wave of nausea hit me. I tried to shake it off, but the pit in my stomach deepened. Was this what was really going on? She'd been seeing someone else. I felt like the room was spinning around me as I retreated into the hallway, trying to steady myself. My mind raced with all the possible scenarios. How long had this been going on? How long had she been lying to me? And more importantly, why didn't I see it coming? Why didn't I pick up on the signs sooner? But I couldn't confront her right then. Not yet. I needed to collect myself. I needed to understand exactly what was happening before I made any decisions. So I waited. That night, I lay in bed beside her, but it felt like I was in a completely different world. The distance between us had never felt more palpable. I could feel her breath beside me, but it wasn't comforting anymore. I was close to her, yet it felt as if I were miles away. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Every thought seemed to lead back to one question. How did I let this happen? The next morning, everything seemed like it was going to be the same. Emily didn't mention anything about the phone call, and I didn't bring it up either. It was as if we were both pretending that nothing had changed. But the tension was there, thicker than ever. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. So, after a few days of agonizing over what I had heard, I finally decided to confront her. I had to know the truth. No more hiding behind subtle hints and cryptic conversations. I waited for the right moment. It came when we were having dinner, just the two of us, the way we used to do when things were good between us. I stared at her across the table, trying to read her face, but it was as blank as ever. "Emily," I said, my voice shaky with anxiety. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She looked up from her plate, meeting my eyes for the first time in days. There was a flicker of something in her expression, but I couldn't place it. It wasn't guilt, but it wasn't innocence either. Is there someone else? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Is there something you're not telling me? Her fork clinked against her plate, and she hesitated for a moment before answering. For a brief second, I thought she might deny it, but instead, she looked down at the table, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean for things to get this far. But yes, there's someone else. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Everything I had believed in, everything I had thought we were, shattered in an instant. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I didn't know what to say. My heart was racing, and the world around me felt distorted, like I was living in a nightmare. So that's it? I asked, the words barely leaving my lips. You've been seeing someone behind my back, and you've just been pretending everything was fine? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to tell you. I never wanted to hurt you, Peter, but I'm not happy anymore. I haven't been for a long time. I sat there, speechless, my mind struggling to process the weight of her words. How had I missed this? How had I not seen the signs? I had let it all slip through my fingers. But now, the truth was out in the open, and there was no going back. The words hung in the air, suffocating me. I felt like I was sinking into the chair, the weight of what she had just said pressing down on me, crushing me from all sides. There's someone else. Those 4 words, so simple yet so devastating. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers. But I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like I was choking on the reality of it all. I stared at Emily across the table, her eyes downcast, her hands nervously fiddling with her napkin. It was almost as if she couldn't bear to look at me, or maybe she didn't want to see the heartbreak in my eyes. I tried to swallow, tried to make sense of what she had just confessed. But no matter how much I tried to process it, the reality didn't sink in. How long has this been going on? I finally managed to croak, my voice cracking. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that she had kept this from me for so long, while I had been living in a false sense of security. Emily hesitated, her eyes still focused on the table. A few months, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I didn't want it to happen. It wasn't planned. But it did, and I can't undo it. A few months. My mind reeled. For months, I had been completely blind to what was happening right under my nose. I had been so caught up in my own life, in my own routine, that I hadn't even noticed the slow, insidious changes in her. The late nights, the distracted conversations, the distance that had crept between us. But I never connected the dots. I never questioned it. Who is he? The words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop them. I hated myself for asking, but I needed to know. I needed to understand the extent of this betrayal. Emily looked up at me then, her eyes brimming with tears. But there was no remorse, no guilt in her gaze. There was something else, something I couldn't quite place. His name is Matt, she said quietly. We met through work. It started as nothing, just a few conversations here and there. But over time, she trailed off, her voice faltering. I sat there, trying to process everything she was telling me. Matt. A name I didn't recognize, a person I didn't know. She had built a relationship with someone else behind my back. Someone who had taken the place that I thought I still occupied. My hands clenched into fists under the table, but I didn't know what to do with the anger that was bubbling up inside of me. I felt betrayed on a level I couldn't even describe. I stood up abruptly, pushing my chair back with a loud screech that seemed to echo in the otherwise quiet room. I needed space. I needed to get away from her, from this conversation. I needed to breathe. Emily looked up at me, her face filled with a mixture of guilt and something else. Fear, maybe? Peter, please, she said, her voice pleading. I never wanted to hurt you. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can fix this. I shook my head, backing away from the table. You can't fix this, I said, the words harsh, even though I didn't want them to be. How do you fix something like this, Emily? You've crossed a line. You've already made your choice. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand to stop her. I don't want to hear it. Not right now. Not from you. I didn't even know where I was going as I left the room. I just needed to get out, to escape the suffocating tension that had taken over our home. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, swirling around in my head as I walked aimlessly through the house. I didn't know if I wanted to punch something, scream, or just collapse on the floor and let it all hit me. But I couldn't do any of those things. I couldn't let her see how much this hurt. I ended up outside, standing in the yard, the cool air hitting my face as I tried to collect myself. But there was no collecting myself. There was no putting this together into something I could understand. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, was now a stranger to me. And I didn't know what to do with that. I paced back and forth in the yard, the darkening sky overhead mirroring the storm inside me. How had we gotten here? How had I missed the signs, the subtle changes in her behavior that now felt so obvious? Had I been too focused on my own life, on my work, to see what was happening to our relationship? Had I been that blind? The questions kept spiraling, and each one seemed to make my chest tighten more. I couldn't stand the thought of losing her, but I also couldn't stand the thought of being with someone who could betray me so completely. Eventually, I went back inside, but I didn't go straight to the kitchen where she was still sitting, waiting for me to return. I didn't know what to say to her. I didn't know how to face her after what she had just confessed. I went into the bedroom and shut the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment as I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. But even as I tried to calm myself, I could still hear her voice in my head, the way she had spoken about Matt. There was a strange finality in the way she said his name, like he was already a part of her life that I no longer had a place in. It was clear now, there was no turning back. No matter what happened next, no matter what I decided, things would never be the same. Our marriage, the life we had built together, had shattered in an instant, and I didn't know if I could ever put it back together. The days after Emily's confession were a blur. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every moment felt like I was walking through a fog, unable to see or feel anything clearly. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, over and over again, trying to piece together the fragments of truth she had thrown at me. Every time I thought I understood, another wave of confusion hit me. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this? The pain was raw, fresh, and all-encompassing. I wanted to confront her, to yell at her, to ask her why. But when I looked at her, there was nothing left to say. She had already given me her answer. She had made her choice, and I was no longer the one she wanted. I had spent years loving this woman, sharing my life with her, building something I thought was unbreakable. And now, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Just like that. It was hard to look at her without seeing the woman who had already emotionally checked out. The woman who had found someone else, someone who had taken my place in her heart, even if she wasn't willing to admit it completely. I could tell she was sorry, but sorry didn't fix anything. Sorry didn't change the fact that she had lied to me for months, that she had let me live in ignorance while she slowly fell out of love with me. That's what hurt the most. The feeling of being completely blindsided, of trusting someone who had been deceiving me every single day. She tried to talk to me, of course. Emily would come into the room, sit next to me, and try to explain herself. But it was always the same. The words were empty, the apologies felt hollow, and every attempt to make things right only pushed me further away. I wanted to listen, I really did. But each time I heard her voice, I was reminded of the betrayal. I was reminded of the man named Matt, the one who had come between us without me even realizing it. I couldn't look at her without seeing the guilt in her eyes. But it wasn't just guilt, there was something else. Something darker. A sense of finality. It was like she had already made peace with what was happening, like she had already let go of me. And every time she spoke, I felt like I was grasping at something that had already slipped through my fingers. One night, after a particularly tense dinner, I sat in the living room, alone, nursing a glass of whiskey. It was the only way I could quiet the whirlwind inside my head, even if just for a moment. Emily had gone to bed early, probably exhausted from the emotional weight of what she had put both of us through. But I couldn't sleep. My mind was too loud, too full of questions that had no answers. I leaned back in the couch, staring at the empty room. How had I been so blind? Was it my fault? Was there something I had missed? There had to be. I had seen the signs, hadn't I? The late nights, the quiet phone calls, the growing distance between us. But I had ignored it all, convincing myself that everything was fine, that we were fine. I could feel the anger building up inside me, but it wasn't directed at her anymore. It was directed at myself. I had let this happen. I had allowed my own complacency to let our marriage slip into this suffocating silence. And now, I was paying the price. I stood up, the anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. I needed answers, but the only person who could give them to me was Emily. I had to confront her again. But this time, it wasn't just about the affair. It was about the years we had spent together, the promises we had made, the life we had built. I wasn't just angry at the infidelity. I was angry at the way she had taken everything from me without a second thought. I found her sitting on the bed, staring out the window, her back to me. The quiet between us was deafening, as if the weight of everything had settled into the room. I wasn't sure how to start, but there was something deep inside me that refused to let this go. I needed to understand why, to hear it from her own lips. "Emily," I said, my voice rough but steady. "We need to talk again." She didn't turn around. "About what?" she asked, her voice distant, almost detached. "About everything," I replied, taking a step closer. "About how we got here. About how you can look me in the eye and tell me you love me while you're sleeping with someone else." She flinched at my words, and I could see her shoulders tense. But she didn't turn around. She didn't face me. "I don't know what you want me to say, Peter," she muttered, her voice small. "I've already told you everything." "You've told me enough," I said bitterly. "But not everything. You haven't told me why. Why him? Why now? Was I not enough for you? Or was it that I stopped trying?" Her silence felt like a slap in the face. She didn't answer, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. I could hear her breathing, shallow and uneven, but it was like the words I needed from her had died on her lips. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Emily," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But what hurts the most is that you've already let go. You've already moved on, and I'm still here, holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore." She finally turned to face me then, her eyes red from crying. But there was a hardness to her expression that I had never seen before. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make you understand." "Then don't," I said sharply. "Because the truth is, I don't think you want to fix it. I think you're already gone. And that's the hardest part of all." The words hung between us, the finality of them sinking in. We both knew it now. There was no turning back. The days that followed were filled with a strange kind of numbness. It wasn't that I was ignoring the situation. I couldn't escape it, even if I tried. Every room in the house felt haunted by her absence, even when she was physically there. Her presence had become a shadow, a ghost of the woman I once knew. We barely spoke, exchanging only the most basic pleasantries when we crossed paths. There was no more warmth in the air between us, only silence, thick and suffocating. I was trapped in my own mind, constantly replaying the moments I should have noticed, the subtle changes, the small detachment that had crept in over time. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? But now it was too late. She had already moved on, or at least that was what I told myself. The look in her eyes had changed. There was no affection, no trace of the love that once burned between us. She had stopped fighting for us a long time ago, and I hadn't even realized it. That evening, after another day of awkward silence, Emily approached me with a tentative look on her face. I didn't want to talk to her, not after everything that had been said, but she wasn't going to let it go. "Peter," she said, her voice soft, almost fragile. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to avoid her. But something in her voice made me pause. I looked up at her, my eyes cold, though I could feel a small part of me still hoping for the woman I once knew to be there, even if only for a moment. "About what?" I asked, my words sharp, though I hated how bitter they sounded. She hesitated, her hands wringing the hem of her sweater. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've messed up. But I want to be honest with you, Peter. I need you to understand that I never meant for it to get this far. I never thought we'd be here." I could feel the anger simmering inside me, rising to the surface. "Really?" I shot back, unable to hold it in any longer. "You never meant for it to get this far? That's a load of crap, Emily. You were already gone by the time I even realized there was a problem. You've been checking out of this marriage for months, and now you expect me to just sit here and act like everything's fine?" Her face flushed, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of something. Regret, maybe? But it was fleeting. She sighed and looked away, like the weight of it all was too much to bear. "I'm sorry. I really am," she whispered. "But I can't take it back. I can't undo what's been done." I stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. "You don't get it, Emily. You don't get that it's not just about the affair. It's about everything else. The lies, the way you shut me out, the way you stopped caring. You left me long before you met him." Her eyes filled with tears, and I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered the months of distance, the nights I spent alone in our bed, the quiet dinners where she barely looked at me. She had already chosen him, whether she realized it or not. I started pacing the room, my frustration boiling over. How long, Emily? How long were you planning to keep this from me? Were you just waiting for me to catch on, or were you hoping I wouldn't? Is that what this was all along? Some slow, painful exit strategy? She flinched at my words, and for a moment, I thought she might break down completely. But instead, she just stood there, eyes locked on the floor, unable to look at me. I didn't know how to end it, Peter, she said quietly, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to tell you that I wasn't happy. I didn't know how to face you and say that I was falling out of love with you. So I let it happen. The words hit me harder than any punch could have. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, and I sank back down into the couch, my hands gripping the armrests. My chest felt tight, like there wasn't enough air to fill my lungs. You didn't know how to tell me? I echoed, trying to wrap my mind around what she was saying. You didn't know how to tell me that you were done with me? You didn't think that was something I should have known? That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard, Emily. She didn't respond. She couldn't. She just stood there, her eyes welling up with tears that she refused to let fall. It was as if she was trying to hold on to some last shred of control, but I could see it in her face. She had already given up. I stood up again, this time more slowly. I felt exhausted, defeated. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly, almost to myself. I can't keep living like this, pretending that we're okay, when everything between us has already fallen apart. I turned to walk away, but something stopped me. Something in her expression made me pause. She looked like she was on the verge of saying something that could change everything. Peter, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't say anything in response. I didn't need to. The apology was meaningless now. It didn't matter. The damage had already been done. And as I walked out of the room, I realized something important. She wasn't the person I had fallen in love with anymore. She had become someone else. And that person was no longer my wife. The days that followed felt like a slow, suffocating descent. I'd wake up every morning with the weight of it all pressing down on me. I had expected some kind of relief after the confrontation, but instead, it only intensified the feeling that I was losing my grip on everything that had once felt real. Every inch of the house reminded me of her, of us, and I couldn't escape the memories. Even the smallest things, like the smell of her perfume in the hallway or the faint sound of her voice in the background, haunted me. I spent my days lost in my own thoughts, trying to drown out the noise in my head. But there was no escaping it. Every decision I made, every movement I made throughout the day felt like I was walking in a fog, unsure of who I was anymore. I didn't recognize the man I had become, the man who was trying desperately to piece together a life that had been torn apart. Every time I tried to engage with Emily, there was this wall between us. I wanted to talk to her, to ask her what had really happened, to understand how we had reached this point. But every conversation seemed like an exercise in futility. The more I spoke, the more I realized that we were no longer speaking the same language. She had already checked out, emotionally, mentally, and physically. She would sit in the kitchen, staring at her coffee, her eyes distant, as though she were lost in some far-off place. There was nothing in her gaze anymore. No connection. No trace of the woman I had fallen in love with. It was during one of those quiet moments that I knew I couldn't keep living this way. The silence between us had become unbearable, and every time I looked at her, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. So, I made the decision. I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was going to be okay when I knew deep down that it wasn't. But at the same time, I didn't know how to leave. The idea of walking away from everything we had built together, felt like an impossible choice. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that jumping would shatter you, but still not being able to see another way forward. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a dim light through the windows, Emily and I found ourselves in the living room again. She was sitting on the couch, and I was pacing in front of her. I could feel the tension hanging in the air, like something was about to break. But neither of us spoke. The silence between us was deafening. I stopped pacing and turned to face her. I can't keep doing this, Emily, I said, my voice tight. I don't know how to live in this void anymore. It's like we're both ghosts in this house, just pretending everything's fine. She didn't look up, her eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't know if she was avoiding me or if she had just given up completely. But I couldn't keep pretending either. We can't keep living like this, I continued, my voice gaining strength, though my chest felt like it was being crushed. I need to move on. I need to find a way to fix myself, because I don't even recognize who I am anymore. Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but there was no hope in them. There was no spark of the woman I had loved so deeply. Just emptiness. I don't know what to say to you anymore. Peter, she said quietly, her voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this either. I'm sorry, but I've already made my choice. I've already moved on. Her words struck me like a physical blow. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what she had just said. It felt like I was drowning, gasping for air, but the reality of her departure was sinking in deeper with each passing second. I'm sorry too, I whispered, the words almost more for myself than for her. I never thought it would come to this. I thought we could work through it. But I guess I was wrong. The silence returned, heavier than ever, and I could feel the weight of all the unspoken words pressing down on both of us. She stood up from the couch and walked past me, her steps slow, almost deliberate. I wanted to say something. Anything. To make her stop, to make her see that there was still a chance, but I couldn't. The damage had already been done. We had already reached the point of no return. And even though I wanted to fight for us, I realized that fighting wasn't enough anymore. We had both checked out. We had both let go. I watched her retreat down the hallway, the sound of her footsteps fading as she went into the bedroom. I stood there in the living room, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. The decision had been made, but I didn't know how to move forward. The world outside seemed foreign now, and I couldn't remember what it felt like to be whole, to be part of something that mattered. But all I knew in that moment was that I couldn't stay in this limbo anymore. I couldn't stay in a place where love had been replaced by apathy, and I couldn't stay in a house where silence was the only conversation left. I needed to leave. I needed to rebuild. But even as I made that decision, I realized that the hardest part wasn't leaving Emily behind. It was walking away from a life that once felt like home, and knowing that no matter how much time passed, I would never be able to get it back. I didn't sleep that night. The hours dragged on in the silence of the empty house, each tick of the clock reminding me of how much time had passed and how little of it we had left. Emily had retreated into the bedroom, and I could feel the weight of her absence even when she was just a room away. It wasn't just that we were no longer speaking. It was that we had completely stopped existing in the same space. She had chosen him, chosen the life she was building outside of me, and now all that was left was the wreckage of a relationship I had never seen coming. I spent the night walking around the house, staring at the places where we had once shared our happiest moments. The kitchen counter where we'd laughed over breakfast, the couch where we'd curled up to watch movies, the bed where I used to wake up beside her, tangled in the warmth of our shared life. All of it now felt foreign. The life we had built was crumbling, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop the memories from haunting me, couldn't stop the sharp pangs of betrayal that surged in my chest every time I thought of her and Matt. By the time the sun began to rise, I knew what I had to do. The weight of it settled on me like a heavy stone. Every part of me screamed that this was the right decision, but there was a part of me that clung to the past, unwilling to let go of the life we had built together. But I couldn't stay anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that things would get better when I knew they wouldn't. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, my face drawn and tired. I looked like someone who had been fighting a losing battle for far too long. But I also looked like someone who was finally ready to stop fighting, someone who was ready to start over. It was terrifying, but in the quiet of that moment, I realized that I didn't just need to leave Emily. I needed to leave the person I had become in this marriage, the version of me that had been swallowed by my desperation to keep things together, even when everything was falling apart. The sound of Emily's soft footsteps behind me startled me, and I turned around to find her standing in the doorway of the bedroom, her face still tear-streaked, her hair disheveled. She had been crying again. I could see it in the redness of her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything was too much to bear. Peter, her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but it still carried that same emptiness I had grown so used to. I didn't know if it was because she was sad, or because she had already checked out of this marriage long ago. What do you want, Emily? I said it softly, but the edge in my voice was unmistakable. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of the pain, tired of the lies, tired of pretending that anything between us still had a chance. I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can fix this. Her words were a knife to the heart, but I wasn't surprised anymore. We had both been broken for so long that I was no longer sure there was anything left worth saving. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to look at her, to really see her, even though every part of me wanted to look away. Emily, I said, my voice steady, though my chest was heavy with all the things I couldn't say. It's too late to fix this. We're too far gone. And you know it. You've already made your choice. And I've made mine. Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I thought she might say something to make it all go away. To say that she was sorry, to take it all back, to tell me that she didn't really mean it. But she didn't. Instead, she took a small step forward and stopped just shy of reaching me. I never wanted this to happen, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for a split second, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the months of silence, the long nights she spent in the guest room, the way she had checked out long before I had caught on. You don't have to say it, I said, cutting her off. Because we both know what's happening here. We can't keep pretending. We can't keep holding on to something that's already gone. I turned away from her, feeling the weight of every word, every decision, sinking into me. As much as it hurt, as much as it felt like I was walking away from a piece of myself, I knew that leaving was the only way forward. I didn't want to be this man anymore, the one who clung to a broken past and tried to force something that wasn't meant to be. I'm leaving, I said, my voice steady but quiet. I need to start over. I need to find myself again. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily didn't speak, didn't beg me to stay. She didn't argue. She just stood there, frozen in place. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I knew that whatever it was too late to change. I wasn't the man she wanted anymore, and she wasn't the woman I needed. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door, my heart pounding as I pulled it on. I didn't look back. I couldn't. As much as I wanted to stay, to hold on to the last thread of hope, I knew it was over. And so I left. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But the air was bitter and cold, and I wasn't sure where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house, in that life, any longer. I had to leave the past behind and find a way to rebuild from the rubble. It was going to be hard. It was going to be painful. But as I stepped out into the night, I realized that for the first time in a long while, I was finally free. The first few weeks after I left were nothing short of a blur. I had packed up my things in a rush, leaving behind the house, the memories, and most of the life I had built with Emily. It was hard, harder than I expected, but there was an odd sense of relief that came with each passing day. It was like a weight was slowly being lifted off my chest, though I wasn't sure if I could ever truly shake the ghost of my old life. The apartment I moved into was small, nothing special, but it was mine. It felt like a fresh start, and for the first time in months, I began to feel like I could breathe again. I wasn't waking up in the middle of the night to that suffocating silence anymore. The walls no longer echoed with unspoken words. The emptiness was still there, but it was different now. I was learning to fill it with something else. I spent my days trying to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. I took up old hobbies I'd forgotten about: painting, photography, running. I spent time with friends I had neglected over the years. Slowly, I began to rebuild myself. At first, it was difficult. The memories of Emily and everything we had shared still haunted me, but they started to fade, replaced by new experiences and new people. I learned to let go of the past, piece by piece, and focus on the future. Then, one evening, about 2 months after I left, I found myself walking through a park, lost in thought. I had just come from a cafe where I'd met a few old friends for the first time in what felt like forever. It felt good to laugh again, to feel like I was reconnecting with the world. The sun was setting, casting an amber glow across the horizon, and I stopped by a bench to catch my breath. That's when I saw her. She was sitting alone on the bench across from me, her eyes fixed on the sunset. She looked peaceful, content, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. I recognized her instantly. Her name was Claire, and we had been friends back in college. We had lost touch over the years, but seeing her now felt like a little spark in the middle of everything that had once seemed so dark. She smiled when she saw me, a smile that was warm, genuine, something I hadn't realized I had missed until that moment. "Peter," she asked, standing up. "Is that really you?" I couldn't help but smile back. "Claire, wow. It's been forever." We spent the next hour talking, catching up on the years we had missed, laughing at old memories. It felt like I had known her all my life. We spoke about the changes we'd gone through, the lessons we'd learned, and somehow, in the midst of all the pain I had been carrying, I realized something. I wasn't broken. Not anymore. I was learning to move forward, to rebuild, and to embrace what was coming next. Over the next few months, Claire and I reconnected, spending more time together. It wasn't a rush into a relationship, but something much more organic. A friendship that had the potential for more, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and a sense of healing. Slowly, I started to trust again, and as time passed, I realized that what had once felt like the end of my story was actually the beginning of something new. One day, as we walked together by the same park where we had met, Claire stopped me, turning to face me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "life has a funny way of working out. We go through the hardest times, and we don't see the way forward. But when you look back, everything has a purpose, even the broken parts." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. I had been so focused on the things I had lost, but now I was starting to see the things I had gained, the strength, the resilience, and the hope that was slowly returning to my life. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was mine, and I was ready for it. As Claire and I walked toward the future, side by side, I knew that no matter what had happened in the past, it had led me to this moment. I wasn't the same person I was when I walked away from Emily. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to build a life I could truly be proud of. The pain had shaped me, but it didn't define me. And the best part was, the future was still unwritten.